We have coming up and joining us next, the Minister of Public Utilities of Trinidad and Tobago, and it is my pleasure to introduce the Minister, the Honourable Minister Marvin Gonzales, who is also currently the Member of Parliament for Lupino Bonaire West. Minister Gonzales has an outstanding record of public service. He started as a police officer. He has pursued his studies in law, attained a master's in law, and is a practicing attorney. In fact, he was instrumental in the DNA legislation that is currently used, as well as the establishment of the Crime Scene Investigators Academy. So Minister Gonzales is obviously someone who is horizon scanning, and it's our pleasure to have him join us and to deliver his perspective on the impact and importance of risk management in the public sector and in changing public sector. So without further ado, I'd like to have Minister Gonzales join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Natasha Subero, chairperson of today's proceedings. The Honorable Iram Lewis, Minister of State, Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction in Bahamas, Mr. Ken Hackshaw, founder and CEO of the Caribbean Risk Management Academy, Dr. Karen Hardy, the CEO and Chief Risk Officer at Strategic Leadership Advisors, panelists, moderators, other specially invited guests, participants, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Allow me first to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of today's conference for the sheer diligence and Herculean efforts required to execute an undertaking of this magnitude. If ever there was a time to which we could perfectly ascribe the word disruptive, it would be now. These pandemic times have forced us to rethink our priorities as individuals, as consumers, as employers, and most certainly as government. Truly, the survival imperative has outweighed every other notion with which we have entered 2020. In a very real sense, the COVID-19 pandemic has been one of the more constructive disruptors we have had to confront in this region. Suddenly, we were forced to contend with harsh realities from which we previously sidestepped. The peculiar nature of the virus drove home the point that possession of oil and gas could not have saved Trinidad and Tobago, and neither could sand and sea save Barbados and Antigua. But as William Ward reminds us in his famous poem, the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts his sails. This conference is about adjusting the sails of Caribbean economies and setting a new course that would allow us to make maximum use of the new wind for as long as we possess it, ever mindful of its transience and propensity for change. This conference is about acknowledging the risks that must be taken as we adjust the sails for the new course of economic growth, understanding that some of the socio-economic drivers that got us to this point bear absolutely no more relevance to where we need to be as a region. These risks can no longer be dismissed or minimized in the hope that a vaccine could make everything right again. If anything at all, the longer it takes to develop a vaccine, the more grateful we might become for the resilience, innovativeness, creativity, and genuine sense of caring and compassion that characterize our lives over the last 9 months. Instead, these risks have to be exploited in a way that leads us to the transformation of our societies, and as some would argue, enable the reinvention of our societies and economies to meet the demands of the fourth industrial revolution. As you yourself have indicated, the right balance must be struck such that innovation is not buried in bureaucracy or limited financial analysis. This can only happen through conscientious risk-adjusted decision-making. Executives tend to agree that the ability to anticipate opportunities and effectively respond to threats is critical for organizations to grapple with new challenges. Yet, they still fail to effectively deal with risk. This explains why we are at the point we are today. This is not a tale out of school, but government's historical involvement in certain sectors of the national economy has been bedeviled by that inability to anticipate opportunities and respond effectively to threats. Two examples easily come to mind: TSTT and TTT. Trinidad Consolidated Telephones Limited became the state-owned telephone service provider in November 1960. Through several incarnations, the new telecommunication services of Trinidad and Tobago, TSTT, effectively held a monopoly on telephone services until 15 years ago, when Digicel entered the market. For the financial analyst or organizational development consultant examining the operations of TSTT in the years prior to Digicel's arrival, the lack of preparedness for the inevitable disruption of its long-held monopoly would be stark and even inexplicable. Trinidad and Tobago Television did not fare any better. For 29 years, TTT operated as the monopoly provider of television services in Trinidad and Tobago. The iconic brand, launched on Independence Day 1962, resonated deep within the national psyche, but was quickly relegated to second and third choice once competition entered the market. Market share would have further decimated with the liberalization of the media industry in the 1990s. Thankfully today, a rebranded TTT is clawing its way back into contention in the marketplace. The cinematic industry in Trinidad and Tobago was another hapless victim of this failure to anticipate changes brought about by modernity and the changing taste of consumers. There are many amongst us here locally who would recall with some degree of joy their days of joining queues to purchase tickets outside the Globe or Palladium or even Ritz cinemas, where for one price you got to see 2 movies, and the comfort of your seat was determined by the price of your ticket. The advent of online ticket purchases, one movie at one price, irrespective of how close to the screen you were positioned, with comfortable seating all around, drove nails into that industry to the point where rigor mortis has already set in and there is no prospect of survival. In this respect, Trinidad and Tobago is not unique. Blockbuster never anticipated the time would come when consumers would no longer be visiting their stores to stock up on rental movies for their weekend viewing. Indeed, they did not anticipate that persons would want to sit and watch an entire series of movies or television shows in one sitting. But then came Netflix. Today's Blockbuster is dead, and you can still Netflix and chill this weekend. And sometimes the disruption must be internal. Apple's iPod, which has given way to Apple's iPhone. The fact that today there are still cockroaches and dinosaurs should be testimony, and no dinosaurs, sorry, should be testimony enough that the Darwinian concept has to be re-engineered to reflect that survival is not only a question of who is the fittest of the species, but rather which of the species is more willing and able to adapt. And all of that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me rather inexorably to the current state of our public utility sector in Trinidad and Tobago. There is no gainsaying that the majority of Trinidad and Tobago is unhappy with the current service delivery of the Water and Sewerage Authority, and perhaps to a lesser extent, the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, TNTEC. The services provided by these two entities are the lifeblood of any household, any commercial enterprise, any government department, and therefore any disruption in their provision is met with howls of public disaffection, and understandably so. These two public utilities, which provide services to consumers at rates that are arguably the lowest in the region, share many similarities. Both are unionized entities. Both have been accused of being heavily overstaffed, especially with persons planted there by politicians on all sides of the aisle. Both have been accused at various times of having severe managerial deficits, and both are vilified for their failure to keep pace with the modern systems that flourish in other jurisdictions. Admittedly, in most cases though, the comparison is not between apples and apples, and so the baby of legitimate criticism wrapped in political posturing is thrown out with the proverbial bath water. The simple truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that we at the Ministry of Public Utilities are fully appreciative of and remain committed to providing efficient and effective leadership for the operations of the utilities sector. Our efforts over this fiscal year will focus on operational efficiency, reliability, governance and accountability, customer service, and innovation. We acknowledge that in some areas, what is needed is a transformation of the current arrangements and the adoption of new business models. And we find our courage in the fact that efficiency is what the people of Trinidad and Tobago have been demanding. The problem really is that our technology has not yet caught up with our ideas. Simply put, we have thought ourselves into the next century without building a solution for tomorrow. It's akin to wanting to wear adult pants while eschewing the idea of growing up. And for that to happen, there is need, an urgent need, for a far-reaching overhaul of thinking, both from a governmental and societal point of view. 1. Consumers, whether residential, commercial, or even government, cannot simply refuse to pay their water and electricity bills and continue to demand 21st century service. In fact, citizens must accept that there is a direct correlation between not paying our WASA and TNTEC bills and bad service. And we ought not to justify the non-paying of these bills on the fact that we are not getting or receiving a reliable service. Managers simply cannot see their responsibility to the representing trade unions and expect miraculous productivity from members. Government cannot continue to dole out billions of dollars in state subventions to our public utilities without demanding a proper return on that investment. In fact, the evidence suggests that it is not really true investments, but rather paying a high price to maintain inefficiencies so as not to disrupt an already collapsed status quo. Trade unions cannot be allowed to continue believing that the responsibility to consult with them must always result in them getting their own way. We cannot continue the incestuous relationship whereby representing trade unions also act as suppliers of labor, goods and services through their proxy contractors within these state entities. And ministers of public utilities must not be allowed to populate and depopulate these institutions according to their whims and fancies and that of their colleagues. We must have the political will to shift the paradigm and disrupt the status quo in order to march towards a sustainable future for our children. That is what constructive disrupting for future-proofing and growth demands. And I have absolutely no doubt that this is what will lead to the creation of a sustainable future for public utilities. There is, without doubt, an absolute need to change the current business models by re-engineering business processes to cater for the multiplicity of identifiable risks. My research has unearthed no compelling reason. For example, why houses in HDC constructed housing communities are not fully metered to track water consumption in the same way that they are metered for electricity consumption. The net effect of this would be to nullify any major overhaul of the system, as there would have been an incremental increase in the number of households throughout Trinidad and Tobago actually paying for what in fact they consume. But how can I, as minister, be deliberately disruptive when the policy prescriptions of government must be executed by those whose vested interests, fortunes, and power are linked inextricably to the success or lack thereof of the very disruption? How can we be successfully disruptive when promotions are not based entirely on merit, but rather on who can outlast whom in the job? And therefore, persons are promoted to the next level of their incompetence. How can we be successfully disruptive when the status quo is revered because of the certainty it offers, more so than the ambiguity of transformative growth? Perhaps the old adage of the impossibility of teaching new tricks to old dogs is indeed true, in which case we need to start with our children. With well-designed pedagogy, we can empower our students with critical skills and help them turn passions into decisive life changes. The role of education can no longer be to teach content alone, but rather to help our children learn in a world that rewards the disruptive innovator and punishes the formulaic adherent. It is often said that the future is in our hands. Unfortunately, the things we depend on so desperately for survival, not least of which is certainty and order, currently tie our hands. Imagine, if you will, if we ran out of oil tomorrow. Would we be able to survive? Of course we would. Would it be the same? Of course it wouldn't. And yet, that day is inevitable. So do we disrupt our public utilities now and reap the rewards of efficiency, agility, increased productivity, and perhaps profitability in the long run? Or do we continue to sacrifice those benefits for the maintenance of the status quo for certainty and job security? I believe that governments, including the one I serve, have a moral obligation to provide the best possible service to their citizens, and that service bar has moved considerably. We who find ourselves in the positions of leadership must also consider the opportunity cost of not availing ourselves of the notion of disruption. Taking a caution approach may indeed shrink the risk to government, but that has never guaranteed a minimization of the cost to the wider society. The calculation facing all government is, and will always be, determining the cost of going too slowly versus the cost of going too quickly. The inevitable success of the ship of progress, guided by disruption, innovation, and recreation, must always trump, in my view, the safety of the ship in the harbor of complacency and settledness, because that's neither where ships were meant to be. nor where good sailors are born. I thank you immensely for the courtesy of your attention, and may God bless the rest of your deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Gonzales. You have just, I think, blown away a lot of people in terms of the discussions, the examples that you used. A lot of them have really, really helped, I think, to visualize what risk management means for our country and the realities. Speaking the truth is one of the things. Speaking the truth can nowadays be considered very risky, unfortunately.
Very risky.
Very risky. So,
and very disruptive.
Oh, absolutely. So we are very appreciative to hear what you shared and very, very encouraged. I know that many of our participants have some questions, and Ken is now joining us as well, so that Ken, please feel free to chime in. I was particularly intrigued by the example of the sailing and the harbor. So, Ken?
Hi, hello, Honorable Minister.
Okay.
So, to your question about ships in harbor, so the maxim goes that ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. So, so we could add that to the lexicon. What in and this is a question that came in to me to ask of you. In your view, what is the role you see of ERM as it relates to effective risk management, governance, and leadership in the public utility space, especially, say, in the Water and Sewerage Authority? What role would ERM play in taking WASA to the next level as is required and as you has enunciated?
I think ERM is inextricably linked to good corporate governance, and it must form an important pillar in the transformation of the Water and Sewerage Authority, as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, TSTT, and all of the public utilities company in Trinidad and Tobago. As a matter of fact, if we had good ERM in these institutions, we would have fared much better, especially in these pandemic times. And there are so many other threats that these public utility entities face as we move forward. I think embracing ERM and making it the nucleus of planning and the nucleus of good corporate governance and decision making, it is very critical for these institutions if they are to survive moving in the next 5 to 10 years and to 20 years, that ERM, managing risk, must be and must play a central role in the governance and the planning of these public utilities institutions. And therefore, as I move towards transforming WASA and disrupting the status quo there, to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can have a sustainable and a secure water future, it is very critical as I go about doing that, that the role of ERM play a central part in the transformation of the organization. And as I move towards preparing TNTech for the role that it has to play, and that critical role that it has to play to provide energy to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that it embrace ERM in a serious way, not in just lip service, not just in paper, but it must form an integral role in decision making.
Right. One last and very easy question. In your mind, what is the greatest risk to those entities? People risk or process risks?
I think they are both equally important. They're almost on the same level, because you take people to institute and to manage processes.
Right.
Other than that, a process would just remain on paper, and it would just remain there for people to follow. So in my view, people and processes must go hand in hand in order for an organization or a utility company to function in the way that we expect it to function. And therefore, in the absence of sound processes and in the absence of trained individuals who are committed to the organization, then the utility company would eventually collapse. And I think that is what we are facing with Trinidad and Tobago, especially as it relates to our water management. Right?
Good. Thank you very much.
The state of WASA, if I'm to say, it's a complete breakdown of processes and a complete breakdown of sound HR management to ensure that your processes are happening in such a way that the organization can deliver upon its mandate to provide a reliable water service to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I hope some of your fellow ministers are also listening to the conversation. But thanks for sharing that with us. Natasha?
Yes, in your speaking just now, Minister Gonzales, you balanced two very uncomfortable truths. One of them was the involvement in politics, and politics hamstringing the operation of the utilities and many other state companies. And in fact, if you were to speak to the senior executives and staff of the utilities, they would often allude to being micromanaged or mismanaged at the political level. On the other hand, at the executive and political level, we have the discomfort of being held accountable, some would say, by the unions and other interest groups, and having to be in some ways checked in that direction. So there are multiple interests, multiple areas of pulling and tugging that have to be balanced, even as we aspire towards future-proofing and changing and transforming the organization. How would you speak to that, that balancing act between, let's say, the blame game and the need for collaboration in transforming and implementing risk management, and really doing so, leading from in front, because you're going to be breaking new ground?
I think that is a brilliant question, because it is that balancing act to which you alluded to over the years that caused us to be where we are today without making any tremendous progress in the way in which we manage our water resources. And you know, our role rather, and our objective and our policy to provide a reliable water service to the people of Trinidad and Tobago 24/7. Over the years, over the last 25 years, 30 years, there have been over 10 reports from various organizations, international organizations, as well as local consultancies that examine the operations of WASA. And they've all concluded, their conclusions rather, and their recommendations, they're very much similar. So the political directorates, the policymakers, the managers and senior executives in the sector, they're all aware what are the problems. It's not new. And it is because over the years, because of too much revenue and too much money in Trinidad and Tobago, we pretended that the problem did not exist. And we kicked the can down the road, hoping that someone will have no choice but to face the elephant in the room and perhaps reap the political whirlwind of having to take decisive action to treat with the problem. The reality is that pandering to the various interests, it did not provide water in the taps for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Getting a politician or people to be employed in WASA to to satisfy a political interest. Whilst yes, it may make a member of parliament or a member of the government popular with his base, the same government is now faced with a backlash from a population that is not getting an efficient water supply. Why is management pandering to the unions for promotion and payment of allowances, etc., when the people or the citizens don't get an effective and efficient water supply? They don't call upon the unions. Rather, they call upon the Minister of Public Utilities or the government to ensure that they get an efficient water supply. So what do you do? And that is the reason I think COVID has, as bad as it is and a threat to human life, I think it has forced us into a corner where we have no choice but to take decisive action and stop the pandering. Stop pretending as though the problem does not exist, because we do not have the money to pretend as though the problem does not exist. And therefore, we are left with no choice but to ensure that WASA functions in the way that it's supposed to function, an efficient water management company that has the capacity to provide an efficient water supply to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And in so doing, some very harsh decisions have to be made. Some major disruptions have to be made in that company. Can I give you an example? Two days ago, we had an interview with the president of the Jamaica National Water Commission. That is the organization that is similar to WASA, with the responsibility of providing an efficient water supply to the people of Jamaica. And you will not believe that with a customer base of 500,000 to 600,000 customers, legal customers, the Jamaica Water Commission does not receive $1 of subvention from the government of Jamaica. The only support they get from the government of Jamaica is to stand as security for some of the credit arrangements that they enter into their financial institution. But the commission is responsible for servicing its debts. And it does so efficiently without defaulting on any of the payments. The same company is providing an efficient service to the people of Jamaica as best as it can. There are some challenges here and there, but they are doing so with a staff complement of 2,100, with a senior executive of 7 vice presidents. In Trinidad and Tobago, with a customer base of 300,000 to 400,000, according to information or data from WASA, we are providing that service with a staff complement of 5,100 workers. And yet still, it takes almost a year to respond efficiently and effectively to repairing a leak or repaving the road. In Jamaica, they are doing all of that in-house. And the longest they take to respond to a report of a leak is 24 hours. And everything is done in-house. They have made use of their technology. They have re-engineered their organization over the years. And even though they are not providing 24/7 water supply to several parts in Jamaica, the company so far is a model that can be followed to the extent that it is financially independent. It does not rely on government subvention. And obviously, not relying on government subvention means that there is a certain level of independence that management will have from the political directorate, because they cannot now leverage with the government and say, because you're sending millions or billions of dollars in subvention, then you're entitled to get 100 staff or 200 staff members. I mean, that is what is happening. But if an organization is financially independent, then it makes business decisions to become and to remain financially independent. But if an organization is tied to its neighbor strings, are tied to the treasury, then it is beholden to the political directorate. And by so doing, so much things are at risk. And at the end of the day, the company will find itself in a situation where it cannot provide the very service it was designed to provide to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. I think that was an extraordinarily thorough answer to our questions. And those were some really, really clear examples that shows we have a long way to go.
I do think we have a long way to go. Once we make critical decisions and we make them fast, I think the people of Trinidad and Tobago will see an improvement in their water supply within the next 2 to 3 years. But critical decisions have to be made, and it is well within our capacity to make those decisions.
Fantastic. Now, acting fast obviously is going to be a key here, because the reality is, as minister or any administration, you really have about 4 years or so to make that change and to make it stick. And transforming people is not something that happens overnight, because we have organizations, as you have been saying just now. I mean, these organizations are decades in the making. So one of the questions that one of our participants asked is, where do you start? Given that you have to move fast, where do you start?
You start at ensuring that you have an effective management team to lead the transformation.
Okay, excellent. The other question that came in was, how do you take that transformation national? Yes, your remit is focusing on public utilities, but we are also talking about transforming the entire public sector. We're talking about transforming the region, because TNTech and WASA don't exist in a bubble. And in the risk management world, you would be familiar with the fact that when we are looking at anything, we have to look at all of the ecosystem. We have to look at the entire ecosystem. So how do we, while focusing on where we're supposed to focus, keep the awareness of the impact of the ecosystem around us, and maybe hope to change that ecosystem as well?
I think as long as we remain in these times, where our economy, our revenue situation is constrained, I think it will force the public sector in Trinidad and Tobago and the entire Caribbean to make the necessary changes in order to survive. What I have recognized is that, too much money flowing in the system, especially with us here in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, we tend to become very lost. We've lost our way, and we pretend as though problems don't exist, and we don't make it a sense of urgency to make some of our public sector organization function in the way that they're supposed to function and as efficiently as possible. Because we tend to believe if you throw money after every problem, the problem will automatically go away, or you can mask and pretend as though the problem don't exist and everybody's happy. And we are carnival people, and we love to believe, and we like to fool ourselves into thinking that our circumstances are far better than what it actually is. So with COVID-19, we no longer have that luxury as a country, as a government, as a public service. And as long as we continue to exist in these circumstances, all our organizations in the public utility sector, all across the public service, all across the Caribbean, will be forced to become efficient. Before I end, right, before I entered politics, I came from the Ministry of Works and Transport, where I headed the legal department. And I was very fortunate to lead a number of, pieces of legislation that saw the transformation of the licensing division. In Trinidad and Tobago, the licensing division was regarded as a place that you can never see change. The demerit point system, the red light camera system, the new fixed penalty ticketing system, and all these brilliant pieces of legislation that saw a transformation of our driving culture. And what we did, and what those pieces of legislation did, however, was to drive the changes inside of licensing division to ensure that its processes were completely overhauled and re-engineered to accept technology. And to the extent that now, a number of the services in licensing department can now be accessed going online. You can start the renewal process for renewing your driver's permit. You can go online and check the the validity of your driver's permit, your vehicle registration, and so many other services. There's an online booking system. And as we go along, and a suite of changes and services are being made available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago utilizing the online platform at Licensing Division. And those things happen because of some of the legislative initiatives that we took over the last 5 to 10 years that drove those changes inside the organization. And you know, when I was going through all of that, there are many people in Trinidad and Tobago told me that it would not have been possible to make those changes inside of Licensing Division. And today, the people of Trinidad and Tobago should be very grateful that the very things that we thought would never happen in transforming the Licensing Division in Trinidad and Tobago are happening before our eyes. And therefore, with that passion and with that determination and that belief that we have as a people, once we put our minds together and behave ourselves and don't be disruptive, we can make the changes that we are required to make to survive as a country.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. What you're saying is we have to know when to be disruptive, right?
You have to be very strategic with it.
Strategic disruption.
That's right.
That was a really, really fantastic contribution to the risk management practice in the Caribbean, and very encouraging for us as strategists and risk practitioners. So your time has been, I think, well appreciated, and we will continue to have the conversations about change in the Trinidad space, in the ministry and in the region. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for allowing me that platform. I really appreciate it. And
Sure.
very successful conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now go on to some intermissions as we end the question session, and we will take a break before we go on to our next speaker, who would be the Honourable Iram Lewis, who is the Minister in the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction in the Bahamas. So stay with us, and we will welcome the Honourable Minister very shortly. Thank you very much.